Okay, let's start. We're going to begin with a prayer for our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. Psalm number 20. Lam natzeach mizmor leDavid yancha Adonai b'yamtzari yisagevcha Hashem elei Yaakov yishlach ezrecha mikodesh u'metzion yisadeka yizkar kol mechaysecha v'lascha yidash nesala yitein lechacha v'lecha v'chal taschi malei Irana b'shuasecha v'shem Eloheinu nidgali malei Adonai kol m'shalasecha ati yadati ki yashi Adonai mishicha yanei mishmekasha b'gvoros yishai minai Ela v'recha v'ela v'susa v'nachnu v'shem Adonai leinu nasker himer kov v'nafala v'nachnu kamen v'nasoydad Adonai Hoshia HaMelech Yanenu V'Yam Karenu. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. May He who has blessed our forefathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob bless the fighters of the Israel Defense Force who stand guard over the land and the cities of our God, from the border of the Lebanon to the desert of Egypt, and from the great sea unto the approach of the Arava, and the land and the air and in the sea. May Hashem cause the enemies who rise up against us to be struck down before them. May the whole of us be preserved and rescue our fighting men from every trouble and distress and from every plague and illness, and may He send blessing and success to every endeavor. May He lead our enemies under their sway, may He grant them salvation and crown them in victory. And may there be fulfilled for them the verse, for as Hashem, your God, who goes with you to battle your enemies for you to save you. Let us respond. Amen. Amen. So, we're going today to talk about Kabbalah. Now, some people, Kabbalah has different connotations, means different things. What is this? Looking at the wrong page, hold on. Give me a second. For those of you who don't have a book, we'll order, God willing, more books, especially those that signed up last minute. We'll get you more books for the coming week. So, what does Kabbalah mean to you? When you hear the word Kabbalah, tell me in 3 words or less, what does Kabbalah mean to you? Spiritual. What else? Jewish mysticism. What else? Numbers, okay. To receive, good, okay. Tradition, okay. What else? For some people, it may be associated with myth, magic. For some, may think about some posh neighborhoods in California of people studying Kabbalah. Some may find it as an optimal way to climb a spiritual ladder and discover the ultimate truth about God, about the universe. Well, today we're going to study Kabbalah, but the difference that you're going to find in this course is that Kabbalah, when you walk out after the 6 weeks, is not going to be something that's only esoteric and distant, but it's going to be something that you could relate to. And not only you could relate to, but it will be able to make a difference and an impact on your life every single day. That every single day, you will be able to turn back to some of these teachings and say, how can this help my life better today? But to understand this, let's take first a look at these driving questions. Number 1, we said, what comes to mind when you hear Kabbalah? The questions over here that we'll be discussing is, what is Kabbalah, to begin with? What are the central teachings of Kabbalah? What is the significance of some of its keys and its terms? Some of you may have found the graph that we'll be referring to, and you say, okay, now I get it all. Well, maybe not. And how are these teachings relevant to my everyday life? And this is where you'll find something tremendously unique about what you're going to learn over here, as opposed to maybe there's other classes out there But number one, you're not only going to learn about Kabbalah, you're also going to learn how it's relevant to me. The last question is therefore the most crucial one. It's easy to talk about mystical, it's easy to talk about spiritual, but can we talk about something that will actually make a difference in my life? The story is illustrated, this idea is illustrated by a story of the Rebbe Maharash, who was the fourth leader of the Chabad dynasty. He was once speaking with a chassid, a follower who was well versed in the Kabbalistic ideas. And the Rebbe inquired about his daily schedule. And he says, what do you do before praying each morning? He says, I try to study the text of the Chassidus, which is teachings based on the Kabbalah. And what do you do during the prayers? He said, I like to meditate on the ideas that I learned. And what do you do after the prayers? He said, I continue to meditate on these spiritual ideas so I could learn more and grow more. And what do you do before going to bed at night? He said, again, I continue to meditate on these ideas, on these deep spiritual ideas. So the chassid was expecting the Rebbe to be very proud of him. And then the Rebbe turns to him and says, you're spending so much time meditating on God. Do you ever spend time thinking about yourself? The chassid was stunned at the question to the extent that he fainted right there. He didn't know what to say. What is the point here? He was investing so much time in meditation, in spiritual, in developing his divine connection, in developing his mystical teachings, to understand it more, to come to a deeper understanding. But then he lost track of, why am I actually studying all this? What is actually the purpose of this? What am I doing this for? So there has to be, although these abstract mystical insights have to actually affect real life. So that is what we're going to do together here. We're going to put a partnership, so to speak, between the mystical teachings of Kabbalah and to navigate and to help us navigate our life, day-to-day life with that. Now, if you take a look in your book, and some of you don't have books, maybe those who are sitting next to you could share. We're going to be taking a quick glance at some of the Kabbalistic works. The first one is from Rav Moshe Cordovera, known as the Ramak, in a book called Pardes Rimonim. And this is where the famous circle and line almost looks like a, what do you call it? Like a DNA, exactly. Like the DNA comes from, where he drew this image in order to explain this. But that's not the only image that we find. We also find a diagram from another Kabbalist, for example, Reb Shapsai Sheftala Levi Horowitz, in the book Shefa Tal, where he makes a completely different image, which is with these circles, as you see. Now, the point of these images, which are found regularly in Kabbalistic works, and some of you may have seen them, probably have, is not there just as a nice picture. And of course, yes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But what are they trying to convey? And so that's what we're going to understand from here. That when we understand that Kabbalah seeks to achieve human character, turning the human character into its ultimate purpose, which is to properly serve God, then you have to explore how this actually affects you and me every day. Let's take a look in text number 1 and page number 6. A mortal is a mirror for the supernal reality. All that exists in both higher and lower realms is present in a microcosmic form within human. This is the deeper significance of the Torah statement that the human was created in the divine image. And this is why we say, from my flesh I envision God. So what are we saying here? That the human character and soul teach us about God. When we understand better who we are, we actually understand that we're created in the image of God. What does it mean created in the image of God? It means that we have the characteristics, so to speak, that God used to create the world. It's those characteristics that God uses to create the human being. The truth is, on a deeper level, it's even more. Because we are the focal point of creation, it is therefore that God created the world in that way also, that it should mirror who we are. That's in a deeper sense. But what do we see from here? That a soul that comes from God will also mirror God himself. And that's why the Kabbalah turns a human character. I'm getting some messages and I'm trying to record. So this is why what happens in our life and who we are very much represent what higher scale of the entire world. Now, Kabbalah explains the different sections of the human character, how they operate within a hierarchy. So the best way to explain this is when it comes to building a home. We'll see this on a video as well. When it comes to building a home, there are 7. There's 7 steps in what you go through, general, maybe more specific. If you want to build a home, or you really want to you want to build anything, right? You want to create something. You want to create a creation. Whether you're building a home, whether you're an artist drawing a picture, whether you want to plant something, whatever it is. There is a multi-rung devolving chain that you have to go through. So the first thing that you have to go through is what we would call is a pleasure. It has to be something that you derive some sort of pleasure from. It means you have a personal interest in this thing. If you have no interest, then you're not going to bother with it. So if you want to live on a farm, and the only lot that you have is in a city, then you're not going to have any interest with that lot in the city. They don't get it. You know what's happening? Someone's trying to sign in, probably next door, but they ask you for a code for a number. You ever had this? You have to have the right number. So they don't realize they keep doing it. They don't realize they need the number. Okay. So the first thing is you have to have some sort of pleasure from what you have interest in. The second thing is you have to have a desire for it. If you don't want it, you don't have to have it. I saw an article recently of a guy who decided to buy a $100,000 plane and to build their home inside this huge airplane. And that was their home. So that's what that person wanted. If you don't want a house in an airplane, you're not going to be. It's not something that you'll have any desire for at all. Some people do. Some people don't. Then you have to justify your endeavor logically, which means that once you're able to bring about the desire and the pleasure for it, then you have to start thinking about it, right? Let's start trying to figure this out. How could we make it happen? That's bringing it about logically. Then, once you're able to bring it logically, you have to start analyzing And then once you start doing that, it begins to affect your emotions. You start feeling for it. How do I feel about this? What am I liking about it? What am I not liking about it? I would really enjoy having so and so. You start having emotions towards that, and then you're able to rethink the plan. Then you speak it over, and then you make the deal and you sign it and you do the action. Now we're going to examine these areas of the human character because this is the same way, so to speak, in a certain way that God created the world. When we talk about creation, it went through this process. It goes through this process as well. Now for today's discussion, we're going to focus primarily on the last three. Thinking, speaking, and the action. But throughout the course, we're going to be climbing this ladder to get through the entire process. Let's take a look at text number 2, page number 7. Rav Moshe Alshich, known as the Alshich, who was with us in Israel, in Tzfat. We passed by the Alshich synagogue. It was one of the blue synagogues, right? Everything is painted blue. At the time, maybe you didn't know who it was, but this is one of the synagogues there. God fashioned a ladder planted on earth whose top reaches into heavens. Sulam mutzav arshav resha megia shemaima. This is a verse from the book of Genesis where Jacob sees a ladder that its foot is on the ground and it's going to the heavens. Right? You know the story, Jacob's ladder. The ladder's rungs serve as channels through which the flow of divine energy can devolve degree after degree in a constant pattern of progressive coarsening until the flow can be received at the lowest extreme of existence. So, we will be introducing these ideas, this idea of this rung, this ladder that we go through, and this different process of creation. But one of the things that we're going to have to do is to learn terms. And that's why you have where's mine? Mine is lost. Did it fall out? What? No. My paper. I guess it must have fallen out in its travelings from the other house. But okay. No, I don't need it. It's fine. You have to have it. I don't need it. I just wanted to point it out to you. But you have these papers. Yeah, I was going to give one to them also. You have two?
No, it's in the workbook also.
Yes, I know. Mine also came with it, but now I just don't see it in my workbook. So it must be sitting on my dining room table. Anyway. If someone came with an extra one, maybe you could pass it over to Toby. If you haven't, did any of you come with two? Okay. So what you have there's two sides to your sheet. So the first side has a bunch of circles, right? A bunch of circles and diagrams. And the other one is terms. We're going to learn both of these, and both of these are going to help you with this journey through Kabbalah. So key term number 1, which is on your list, is called Seder Hishtalshalut. Seder Hishtalshalut. You see that? Right there, number 1, the first term, Seder Hishtalshalut. Seder Hishtalshalut means system of devolution. Literally it means the order of chains. But this is the many degrees of systematic descent that stretch between God's desire to create the universe and the tangible result of that goal. And so that is going to be the first thing. Seder Hishtalshalut. These are Kabbalistic terms, but we're going to make them understandable so that they're not somewhere in the midair, but you'll be able to relate to them.
Why is it devolution? It sounds negative.
Because Because it's actually a downward chain, right? That the evolution would mean going upwards, but it's actually downwards. It's God moving down to create the world, right? So, yes. So, we're going to learn more about this Seder Hishtalshalut over the next couple weeks. But for now, once we understand that there is this concept of the Seder Hishtalshalut, of this chain reaction, if you will, from level to level, now we're going to take that and to begin our process. So let's go back to one of the first questions that we ask. We ask, what is Kabbalah? How does it work and why? What is Kabbalah is the first question. What are the central teachings? And how can we understand it? So, question, what is Kabbalah? It's a sophisticated exploration of the order of devolution, right? Again, devolution meaning that God moving down in order to create the world. That is Kabbalah. And if you understand the process, then you're able to understand more the what. If you understand how it is that God created the world, and understand that we are connected to that in a very profound way, then we're also able to understand why this is created, why we have this connection. So, for example, if you have a computer, which I have, by the way, here, a broken one. If anybody wants to get me a new computer, it'll be helpful. But if you have a computer that is, you see the windows and you see the words in front, or you have a cell phone, you see a bunch of apps, then it doesn't seem to work, right? The app seems to break down on you. So then you have to start calling professionals, right? And understanding what's going on. The Geek Squad, exactly. Now, what's the difference between them and me? That they know the workings of it. They know the system of how it's supposed to work, and therefore they're able to fix it. I don't. I'm not a computer programmer. My brother is, but I'm not. So, or if you're a biologist, and you have to understand the human genome, and understand how the human body works, or a doctor. Doctor is able to fix it, to fix the body, because they understand how the body works. So once you understand the inner workings, then you're able to understand more about who we are. With that being said, we also have to take precaution. Text number 3. The saintly Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov taught that when studying the works of Kabbalah, we must be careful not to perceive the Kabbalist ideas as literal physical concepts. Okay, so this is very important, because you saw these beautiful diagrams, and we tend to think of it, okay, so God is up there, and then there's like this chain coming down here. When you talk about spiritual things, there is no up and down. Right? When you talk about higher or lower, if I say the boss is the highest position in the company, does it mean that the boss is on top of me physically? He could be. Doesn't mean that he's even on a higher floor. Doesn't necessarily mean that he could be sitting right next to me, but he's a higher position. When I say that something is sweet, what do you think of? Sugar. Is that the only type of sugar? What other kind of, I'm sorry, is that the only type of sweetness? Honey. Okay, what else? Sweets, okay, yeah, but I'm not talking about that kind of sweets. You could have a sweet melody. Well, a sweet melody, right? You could have a sweet idea. You could have a sweet child. A child is so sweet. Does that change the fact that the candy is sweet? Does it change the fact that the chocolate is sweet? No. But there are different levels when you talk about sweetness. There's a physical sense of sweetness, but there's also a deeper sense of sweetness. So when we talk about these, and does it mean that sweetness doesn't exist here because the chocolate is sweet? Everything has its different meanings on a deeper sense and on a higher sense. And so when we talk about Seder Hishtalshalut, it doesn't mean that it's a chain up there coming down, down, down. It means in a higher sense, it's coming down until we are able to appreciate it in a tangible, physical way. So it's a spiritual sense. We're drawing a physical drawing from which we'll understand the matter in a spiritual sense. So this is the how of Kabbalah is the Seder Hishtalshalut. It consists of non-material realities. And this is perhaps why people get lost in Kabbalah. Because there are things that we can't physically relate to. So you sort of let your imagination drift away. And we lose sense of who we are. You know, they tell a story that there were two Jews in the city of Dvinsk. I went to visit the city of Dvinsk. You've ever been there? Today it's called Daugavpils. It's in the country of Latvia. There were two great rabbis there. One was known as the Rogachover Gaon, Rabbi Yisrael Rosen, and the other was Rabbi Meir Simcha, the Ar Sameach. And there was a debate amongst two individuals in the city, who's a greater rabbi, who's a bigger rabbi. So they're saying, who's a bigger rabbi? This one's a bigger rabbi, that one's a bigger rabbi. A child nearby says, I don't understand. He said, everyone sees that the Ar Sameach is much taller. And the Rogachover, Rabbi Yosef he's much smaller. He's a shorter guy, he's a petite guy. So I don't get the question, of course. The Ar Sameach is the bigger one. They said, no, you don't understand. He says, so we're not talking about body size, we're talking about their stature. So the boy looks and says, now you're completely changing the concept of who they are. Completely. In other words, for him, it didn't actually mean anything, right? The child saying, who's greater? Because he didn't understand. What does it mean greatness? What does it mean being bigger? What does it mean being bigger? So, this is the how. And then we have to go through the why. Why is it so important to study it? Maybe we don't have to study Kabbalah. Many people have not studied Kabbalah for many years until it became the knowledge that's began to spread out. So on one level, the purpose is theological. We have to learn about God, we have to learn about His ways. When we say, V'yahavta eis Hashem Elokecha, you shall love the Lord your God, if you don't study about what God is, then how could you love God? So that's part of what we have to do as a mitzvah, as a commandment, to love God, to fear God. You have to know what God is that you're loving or fearing. But it's more than that. When we understand this devolving chain, then, as I explained earlier, this also helps us understand who we are. And when we understand who we are, we can make better choices in life. Today we're living in a world where many people make a disconnect. There's a disconnect between what's morally right, what's morally wrong. Because people don't understand what is the right things to do. Because they don't understand who they are as individuals. So this applies even more when we try to understand ourselves. The more we appreciate what's up there, the better we can live down here. And that's why it's important. Once we understand this, we could affect and influence it, and then the leading and practical outcome comes out for our lives. And so that's the why But now you say, okay, now get to the point. So now what? Now tell me already, what's Kabbalah? So I'm going to get to it, don't worry. I'm not going to make you just sit here and listen to my rants. But we understand why it's important. Number one, to learn about God. The background information helps us make better choices, and we can affect and influence what happens above as well. When we have what's done in this world properly, that affects as well on high the better choices. So now what's the what? So we're going to begin with the course map. You have Biyah. You see this? You see these circles on your map there? See those little circles? The color's a little off in the projector. So we're going to begin with that. Biyah. Beriah, Yitzira, Asiya. Now those are all gibberish, but we'll break it down so you'll understand it. Text number 4. Page 9. This is from the Zohar. This is the seminal work of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. And this is perhaps where all the ideas of Kabbalah, most of them, stem from here. God's glory includes Beriah, and God bestowed this into the human. God's glory includes Yitzira, and God bestowed this into the human. God's glory includes Asiya, and God bestowed this into the human. Thus the human is rendered in the image of the supernal glory. So you say, great. I got Beriah, Yitzira, Asiya. I have no idea what you're talking about. So let's learn this passage about the three spiritual worlds. These three terms, Beriah, Yitzira, and Asiya, go back to actually creation in the Torah. They weren't made up by the Zohar. They're found in the Bible. When God created the world, we find the term Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'aretz. You're familiar with that verse? In the beginning, God, bara, what does bara mean? Created. Now it's really, let's say, it's translated as created, right? So bara, created. You also find the term Ashadam Asher Yatzar. God made the man that he fashioned, that he formed. Yatzar. Yatzar. You find that term also in the chapters of Genesis, creation. And then you also find the word Vayivarach Elokim. It's called Asher Asa. And God blessed everything that he had made. Asa, made. So you have three terms that are all used in creation, in the book of Genesis, all referencing different forms of creation. One is bara, created. You find the term yatzar, which means fashion. And then you have the word asa, which means to make. So this informs us that there's actually three spiritual realms, three spiritual worlds as we'll call them, in the creation. Beriah, Yitzira, Asiya. And in our microcosm, the human traits, we also have these three ideas. And they match, as you'll see in your book, three human traits known as machshava, which means thought, dibur, speech, ma'aseh, action. Thought, speech, and action. And we're going to break this down. Yeah. We'll get to everything. We'll get to everything. We'll get to everything. We have 6 weeks to talk about this stuff. So this is what's called Biyah. Bia is short for Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, created, shaped, and made. What are these three worlds and why do they exist? So on a basic level, creation introduced the physical matter into existence. Before creation, there was nothing. As I say, scientists came to God and said, we don't need you anymore. We figured out how to create man. Right? Scientists figured out how to create man. So they tell God, we got it all covered. So God says, okay, go ahead, show me how you make it. So they start taking the earth, and they said, with these particles, we're going to create man. God said, you got to make your own earth. Right? When you think about creation, the first step of creation is we have to imagine, and we can imagine it because we're physical beings, but we have to imagine existence. There is no existence of any physical being. So God creating nothing into something. So before creation, there was one identity, and God has to create another identity, so to speak. God has to create something that is outside of himself. And this is where you're going to get the next term that's on there, term number 3, Yeshut. Yeshut. What does it mean? Yeshut means a being, an existence. Something that is. Something that is a sense of self-awareness and independence. Because otherwise, if you don't have something that is a yesh, then you cannot have a being. Now, as they say, Rome wasn't built in a day, and Yeshus didn't emerge in one swoop. They don't say that one. But the three worlds exist because there's a three-form process. Just like the human goes through a process, it's a little dark, it's hard to see. You have the embryo, and then it goes to becoming a fetus, and then it becomes to becoming a full physical maturity of a body. In a similar way, God had to first create the existence of something that did not exist. So that's the embryo. Something that is out there. Something that is outside of myself, that could be a being that is not me. Then, once that emerges, then you have to begin to form it. Bria. You have to begin to form it. And then finally, you have to go to the last one, which is Yitzira. So you have Bria, is the embryo, so to speak. Yitzira is the formation. And Asiya is actually making it into a physical world. Everyone's with me so far? Any questions? A lot. So take a look at figure 1-4. Names of Bia, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya. Bria is created. It's the initial appearance of a novel entity and has a minimal degree of self-awareness. Yitzira is shaping, which is supplying form of pre-existing entity, intermediate. And Asiya is making something, which is completion of an entity's production, and that is the maximal sense of self-awareness. So when we talk, so now we know two terms. One is called Bia, which is these three realms, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya. And the next one is called Yeshut, or Yesh for short. And Yesh is the self-awareness of an existence outside of itself. This is why when you have a marriage, when God created man, God said you have to have a marriage between you have to have a marriage, a man and a woman, and then you could create. Also, you have the ability to create. You have this infinite power of ability to create another form, another existence. Yes?
So, what's puzzling me a little bit is perhaps it's the translation from the Hebrew to the English, but the word created in English, that to me is the whole process, including the making.
Right. So
Another way,
there isn't really a word in English. That's the problem. You have to think of a word in English that is that's not fully creating, but just allowing something to exist outside of itself.
How about conceived?
Okay.
Conceived is thought.
Yes, but the problem is that when you talk about conceive, you're only leaving it as an idea, right? But we're talking about beyond an idea. We're actually talking about creating it, right? So it's sort of between conceiving and creation. I mean, if someone has a better English word that's able to explain it, it's the seminal creation, right? But so it's actually a creation, but only in its first process, in its first form. It's allowing an existence outside of itself. That's the long translation. Creation is Bria is creating an existence outside of itself. Okay. So bara means you're fashioning something from nothing, and then is the act of refashioning into, as opposed to the act of refashioning it into existing material. And that's a problem that we in our realm, in our world, we can't even think about the concept of creating something from nothing. Doesn't exist in our world. So that's part of the problem. Bara also comes from the Aramaic word outside. So it's the first existence that's outside. Yetzira is the second stage. Yatzar means giving shape to a pre-existing entity. Once you have that entity, now you have to form it, now you have to shape it. That's Yetzira, Yatzar. And then you have Asiya, which is making it, completing it, turning it into an active existence. And so this is the different stages of development of Yeshus. However, all three worlds are similar to the sense that their existences, that they feel their own identity separate from God. It's creating an identity that's separate from God. That's why, if you'll return to the figure 1-3, you'll notice here. So let's just go this over again for those that don't have. Bria Yabara, the creation of something from nothing, the first existence that is in its perception outside of God. Yatzar, giving shape to a pre-existing entity. The pre-existing entity starts to develop and become defined. Asa, completing a task, complete independence and self-awareness. Complete independence and self-awareness emerge. Those are the three levels. So now, how do you get to an independent entity? You have to have what we call an olam hapirut, a world of separation. And number two, you have to somehow say that this is not God, in the sense that it doesn't feel that way. You're not able to feel or sense God's being. Because if you feel God's being, then you won't be able to connect to it. So there has to be some sort of absence of the divine name. So how does that come about? So we're going to give you another explanation in a way that may help out a little bit. Let's first read text number 5. There are three rungs: Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. Bria is the first introduction of Yeshut, an independent self-concept. However, existence only develops into a complete Yesh when it reaches the third stage. The reason Yeshut develops gradually is because the initial stage of existence remains close to God, and His presence is very much sensed at this level. Then Bria devolves into Yetzira, where the presence of God is somewhat concealed. Finally, Yetzira devolves into Asiya, where God is completely concealed. At this point, existence becomes a true Yesh and gains complete sense of selfhood. So to explain this, we're going to give a concept from teenagers. Anybody have teenagers that they parented? Parented teenagers? Suffered through it? Okay. So we have three different teenagers. The first one we're going to name her Sarah. The second one we'll name her Rachel. And the third one we'll name her Rebecca. You have two of those names out of three? Okay, there you go. So now maybe you could connect to this. So Sarah is a very independent one. She's not synonymous with her parents. She likes to be herself. She likes to be her own character. She likes to go and march in those parades that her parents say don't. She says, I'm not my parents. She can negate the proposition as if she doesn't, as if they don't exist at all. She says, I'll go make my own money. I'll go take care of myself. All right, I'll come home for holidays, but aside for that, I'm doing my own thing. Right? You know, you could ever seen those type of teenagers?
I have a Sarah.
Okay, you have a Sarah. All right. Then the other extreme is the Rachel. The Rachel she's she is able to define who she is, but still she's very much within her parents' existence. Actually, really the opposite, but okay. Rachel says, I need my parents. I want to be with them. She's a girl who always has to be home. She's a girl who always has to be with her mother. She's the one who has a difficulty being away at school. She's not able to go away to college. She cries every day when she's away. She's too much connected to her parents. You know that kind of girl? And then most kids are Rebecca, somewhat in between. Not too much connected, but not too far apart. So one of the causes can be the parents' relative proximity or distance to their children. Some parents may be very, very protective and always on top of everything that their children do. And always asking them, where are you going out? What are you doing? Who are you hanging out with? You can't go, it's too late. You have to make sure to be home on time. You have some parents that say, go out, have a great time. Just make sure that you're back home some point in the morning. And then you have some parents that are in between. They're somewhat protective, but not completely protective. And you could have two parents. You could have the mother's one way, the father's another way. But what we're seeing from here, what we're using out this idea of the teenager, which is, again, children is a very good explanation for this concept of creating an existence outside of yourself, because that's essentially what a child is. God gave man and women the ability to create. Procreate means the ability to create. So what are we doing? We're creating an existence that is part of us, but at the same time, an independent existence. That's what a child is. It's a child that's part of me, comes from me, but is an independent existence. We, in a certain sense, we're called God's children. Why? Because we have that in a certain sense as well. We are the created beings that God formed, but also making us into an independent being. So now when it comes to this, you may feel God's force somewhat more or somewhat less, depending on the creations of what they are. The first stage of Yeshus is Bria. It's God's creative energy, and we could sense God very much so in the first level of Bria. As the levels begin to form more, Yetzirah feels a little bit less God's existence. and Asiya, we feel even less God's existence, and ultimately be able to create a physical world where we could live in a physical world that we can't see God at all. We can't recognize God's being here at all. Even though we're able to learn about it, we're able to understand it, we're able to believe it, but you can't actually feel it fully. And so now, in this example, of course, you know, the metaphor of the children also has its shortcomings, but the idea we understand, because ultimately God is always going to be here. God is always even here, even though we don't see God's presence, but God's presence is constantly here. We don't always feel it, we don't always see it, but the presence is still here. So this is the next term 1-4, bittul. Bittul is the opposite of yesh. Yeshus means self-identity, self-awareness. Bittul means surrender, suspension, nullification. Means how you have to ascribe to something that is greater than yourself and make that connection to something to surrender, which is translate here, a subdued sense of self due to being absorbed by something overwhelmingly impressive and desire to become one with it. So, if you were, for example, to light a flame and bring it out in broad daylight where the sun is shining, so that flame is bittul. It's completely nullified to the existence of the greater, overpowering, overwhelming existence of the sun. Now, if you were to bring that fire out in a dark place, in a dark room, that is a yeshus. That's an existence that is aware, that's self-aware. It's very important, it's very significant. So they could be the very same thing. In some situations it is a yesh, and in some situations it is batul. It is a bittul. That very same flame in broad daylight is completely bittul, it's completely surrendered to its overpowering light that's there. And in a dark room, it is a complete existence of itself. You following me? So, bittul. Huh?
Where is that in the book?
Bittul, it's 1-4. You see page 13, yeah. Thank you. There was one evening, it was in Russia, there was a group of Hasidim that were out farbrengen. What's a farbrengen? A farbrengen is a gathering of inspiration, of motivation, to try and inspire each other. And this was under the communist regime. And you weren't necessarily allowed to do these things. Actually, not necessarily. You weren't allowed to do these things. And on top of that, there's also curfews, and you weren't allowed to be out late at night. But they, undeterred, they sat together trying to inspire each other, and they had a little l'chaim as well. And as they were walking home, they were singing some joyous Hasidic melodies. So one of these was Rabbi Pesach Molostovsker was his name. He was singing on the way home to his apartment, and sure enough, he was stopped by a cop, by Russian police. He probably didn't have enough cash to get rid of him, so he asked him. He said in Russian. He said, "Kto idiot?" Kto idiot means who goes. So the chassid was after being so inspired, he answered bittul idiot, which means bittul is going. What does bittul mean? A nothing. A nothing is going. I'm completely surrendered. I'm non-existent. So he said bittul idiot. So the Russian police did not understand what he's saying, but he did let him go. But in other words, he was at that moment of inspiration. It wasn't that he said it as a joke. At that moment, because I'm sure he wasn't thinking of having any jokes with the Russian police, who are they're not the local Sumter County sheriff. These people will throw you in prison in a second. But that's really what he felt. He felt after a whole night of inspiration, of connecting to God, of being inspired, of coming close to God. He felt that I'm a nothing, right? At this point, I'm completely nullified. So that is Bria. Bria feels complete bittul. Yitzira and Asiya, on the other hand. Wait, let's go back here for a moment. Yitzira and Asiya, on the other hand, they feel more of themselves. And the more you feel of yourselves, the more you could do things that are outside of the realm of godliness, if you will. Once these realities develop, then what we refer to as Asiya Gashmis, the corporeal Asiya, becomes possible. And that's how you're able to live in a world that there is so much evil and so much bad. As some of you mentioned, you saw my brother. Some of you said you saw him on Fox News. He was on CNN. I did not see the Fox interview, but I did see the CNN. It was Jake Tapper, and Jake threw him a curveball, and he asked him, why do you think God allowed this to happen? He says, you're a rabbi. Maybe you could say, why would God allow this to happen? And my brother, who learned Chassidus and learned Kabbalah, he said that God created a world in which there is evil and there's good. And God allows human beings to have free choice. It's up to the human beings. And we live in a world where God conceals himself and puts that free choice out there. And so the more physical you get, the more you feel your yeshut, the more you feel your existence, your identity, the more you feel that you are independent. One second. The more closer to God you are, the more bittul you are, the more nullified you are, the more non-existent you are. But as long as God is concealing himself, the more physical the world is, the more God conceals himself. So in this transformation of Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, the first level, Bria, is very close to God. So it doesn't feel itself as much, and therefore it's also more nullified to God. The second level, Yitzira, God is forming more of a physical realm, and so it begins to feel itself a little bit more, and so is Asiya. And each one has its own level of souls and angels, which you'll see soon in your book. Let me finish. I'm going to get to you in a moment. Nevertheless, the aforementioned Hasidic story reminds us that we're not confined to a life devout of spirituality. When we study, when we learn, which is what we're doing now, and we understand that God truly exists in this world, if we're out there to look for God, to find God, and not only looking out for God at somewhere else, but somewhere out there in the sky. Look into myself, look into my heart, look into your heart, look into your own existence and say, each and every human being created is fashioned in the very same way God fashioned the world, God fashioned human being. And the very same existence that you have in the world, God's being in the world, is the same within each and every one of us. But we have to learn it, we have to understand it, and then that helps us appreciate more what it's about. So if we have a state of mind, although we're in an Asiya reality, it says Asiya reality, God feels somewhat distant to us. When you're in an Yitzira reality, you're sensing God's presence a little more. When you're in a Bria reality, you're being overwhelmed by his presence. Now there are moments in life where you may be in a more Bria reality. Take, for example, Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, we're more angelic-like. We feel closer to God on Yom Kippur. It's not just that it happens to be a day that's a day of atonement. It's a day of atonement because it's a day when we are leaving our physical existence. We're not confined by our constant physical realities. We're fasting, etc. And that allows us to be in a realm that is much more, that's much more spiritual. Every day we have moments of prayer, we have moments of study, and that helps us come into a Bria reality. Now, sorry, Lynn, you had a question?
So we really, I mean, like, so what you're basically doing is you're just outlining the different things, but you're not saying that Yetzirah is the best place to be.
We are in the world of Asiya. We're in the physical world. This is our world that we live in. This is the world that God placed us in. This is Asiya. This is the world of formation, and that's why God is less apparent in this physical world. But what I'm saying is that if we understand that the other realms exist as well, then that could help us as well to tap into those moments. But the point is, God wants us to be in a physical world. That's the ultimate purpose, as we're going to continue on learning.
Does He also want us to be able to feel His presence?
Both are true. Both are true. But ultimately, there are souls that are. We're going to learn soon. There are souls that are Bria souls. There are souls that are Yetzirah souls. But ultimately, we have these 70, 80, 90 years that God gives us to live in a physical realm to experience the Asiya. And that's with a purpose and a reason, as we'll get to. We're going to watch a video. Hopefully this will help a little bit. Wow, it is late.
What is the Kabbalah? It's Judaism's mystical wisdom. That spark of pleasure that invades your brain's desire center. I want a home, you tell yourself. Immediately, your intellect grabs the wheel. You logically justify your desire and analyze the possibilities. Your emotions chime in. How do I feel about this location? Am I comfortable with high windows? You carefully rethink your plan. You discuss it with friends and are finally ready for action. Sign, build, move. What's all that got to do with heaven? The Kabbalah reveals that when God decided to create the physical world, God first created an entire spiritual system that parallels the experience we've just described. In this first video, we'll take a quick look at the final three stages of this system. In each subsequent video, we will climb one level higher as we explore this supernal chain of command. The mystical work titled the Zohar discusses the existence of three spiritual worlds that precede our own. Their names are Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. These worlds are inhabited by angels and souls before they descend to earth, and those who have passed away and flourish in the afterlife. In Hebrew, the word Bria means to create something from nothing at all. So in the spiritual world of Bria, for the first time in the entire system, things exist that are aware of their own existence. They feel independent, outside of God. That's amazing, because nothing is independent of God. But in Bria, God hides His presence to enable entities to emerge with a sense of self. Nevertheless, the angels and souls that inhabit Bria feel tremendously close to God and are completely focused on God. Everything here is fragile, extremely close to losing its identity and being blissfully overwhelmed by proximity to God. So, God took it one step further and created the spiritual world of Yetzirah, which means to give shape to something. This is where the sense of independence from God truly begins to take shape. Here, God hides His presence to a far greater degree, which allows the spiritual inhabitants of Yetzirah to develop greater self-awareness. That said, God is still sensed in the spiritual place. And so, God made Asiya, which in Hebrew implies a complete and final product. From its perspective, the sense of independence from God is complete. Asiya has two linked layers. Its top layer consists of spiritual beings, and in its lower layer is our physical universe, the tangible, material world we know so well, where we struggle to relate to the divine force that continuously creates us. The good news, even as we reside in the physical Asiya, our souls keep a connection with those higher worlds from which they emanate. The spiritual Asiya helps us peer beyond the physical. Yetzirah empowers us to suspend our self-focus long enough to sense God's presence. And Beriah helps us feel blissfully overwhelmed by God's presence, at least momentarily, such as in a moment of meditative prayer. So, we walk planet Earth, but at the same time, we can be firmly rooted in the bliss of spiritual loftiness.
So now we talked about Bria, Yetzirah. We started a little late. I'm going to have to go a few minutes over time, but I'm going to try and get everything that we can in these next few minutes. Do you mind just pressing the on button? Thank you. So the question is, how does this translate into the soul? So we did talk about a fact, and he pointed out in the video as well, that we do have moments within our soul that are Bria moments, Yetzirah moments, right? And our souls are constantly connected, and there's different souls that come from different worlds and still connected to those worlds. So you may have someone that is a more spiritually inclined individual. That may be because they have a soul that's more connected to the realm of Bria or Yetzirah. But this also translates into our every day-to-day life. And to give you a simple example, if you were to write this down, 2 + 2 = 5, I love moldy tofu. Can you write that down? You could. You could write it down, whether or not you dislike it. Can you say it? You could say it. I'm not going to ask you each to say it now, but you could say it. What's going on here? But then comes the question of, can you feel it? Can you actually feel a 2 + 2 = 5? No, not really.
You can feel that it's wrong.
You can feel that it's wrong. Okay. You can think it. You can think about something that you don't like, that you have no interest in. But the question is, can you actually feel something? And this is what we call the 3 behaviors of thought, speech, and action. Now this is your little the DNA that you have there. But we're going to talk about something that is outside of the realm of that DNA map. Because this DNA is your spiritual makeup. I'm not really good at this. This DNA is your spiritual makeup. That is who you are. That is who each and every one of us are. But then you have garments, what we call garments of the soul. Term number 15, you see the term? Page 14, Levushe HaNefesh, the soul's garments. What are the soul's garments? Thought, speech, and action. Thought, speech, and action. What is the difference between thought, speech, and action than the way you feel, than your emotions? Because they can operate in ways that contradict your soul, and they can easily be changed, and therefore they're called as levushim, garments. Just like a garment. You put on a garment today, put on a garment tomorrow. It could be different. When you're going to work, you're wearing a suit and tie. When you're going out to the beach, you're wearing a bathing suit. When you go out for a jog, you're wearing shorts. Depending on what you're doing, those are the garments that you put on. Does it mean that I'm a different person at the beach than I am in work? No, but I may act differently. But when I'm putting out that handshake, I may give a smile to my business associate, and I may seem like a completely different person on the beach, but that's only because I'm putting on an act when I'm at work. This is my work act. This is my beach act. You could have someone that's relaxing on the beach, but they're really depressed. They look very happy. They could go into a commercial and you see, wow, it's great. They'll put on an Instagram picture, I'm loving it, but really they're depressed and they're not happy with their life. So what you're acting, what you're doing, those three things, what I'm saying, what I'm doing, and what I'm thinking is not necessarily who I am. Text 6a, page 15, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya are comparable to physical garments. We can always remove our garments and dress in alternative garments because garments are not part of our essential selves. In the soul's experience, this correlates to thought, speech, and action, which are not relevant to the core of the soul, but serve only as garments. Now let's break it down. The first one, Bria. Bria corresponds to thinking, Yetzira to speaking, and Asiya to physical action. Now, if you take a moment and you think about someone that you love. Now, you could think about that person. Now, if I would ask you to speak about them, which is going to take too long to ask everyone, but if I was to ask you to speak about them, what would you say? What are the words you would say? And now, if you want to really connect to that person that you love, what would you do? So maybe you want to speak to them and say, I love you, you're so special, you're so gorgeous, whatever it is. And then what will I do? I may give a hug, I may give flowers. Now, in that operation that you're going through, so you're beginning to think about the individual. The fact that you're thinking about them, it's very, very close to who you are. It's very, very close to your being. And so therefore you feel it more. So thought senses the soul's feelings more forcibly. It's constantly churning within us and it remains unknowable to others. This is Bria. Like Bria, it's very close to God. It's somewhat external because I'm thinking about something that's outside of myself, right? And you, what was the word that you wanted to use for Bria? Conceive, right? Conceive means that I'm thinking, that I'm coming up with an idea that's outside of myself. So within your mind, you have that concept of Bria. But it's still internal in the sense that it's still part of me. Now, no one could really, as much as you'll try and explain it, no one could really understand what you are thinking. You could try and express it, and that's where speech comes. I could try and use words, but you're not constantly, unlike thought, it's not constant. It's observable on outward expressions, but no separation between words and the speaker. So in a certain sense, it's still part of you, speech, but at the same time, it's also not really as closely connected to you as thought is. Thought is constant, thought is very internal, and it's really part of me, even though I'm thinking about external things, but it's still part of who I am. Now you try and go and explain what you're just thinking. Well, unless you're like me, that you get paid to do that. But it's very difficult to express what you're thinking as much as you'll try. But still, speech is more connected to who you are. And then the level that is completely separated from you, exists outside of us, is action. You could do something that you absolutely don't believe in, that you don't even want to talk about, that you don't even want to say. It's physical, it's tangible, it's completely external. That's action. So this is thought, bria, speech, yitzira, action, asiya. You're with me on this? You also have this in your figure 1.5, degrees of separation. Now, the truth is that this also affects the angels in the different realms of Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, as well as the souls. Now, I'm not going to go into this. You can read this in your book. You have this in your book in page 18, 19, 20. It's very, very interesting how the different angels and different souls are in the different realms. But that's not going to be the discussion for now. So now let's take a look and discover how Biyah is relevant in our lives. You know, they say a Jewish mother was sent home from jury duty. She insisted that she was guilty. Okay. All right, I'm catching on. So, we often tend to struggle with our tendencies and our character traits. Sometimes we're a little too harsh on ourselves. Sometimes we're a little too over-anxious with ourselves. I take a look at 1.1, page 22. How many of these things that does not pose a challenge to you? Then mentally identify one that was: anger, extravagance, jealousy, arrogance. Well, I'll let you think about it on your own. But what we're learning is something about our character flaws here. What we have to know is that there are certain things that are within our character that we are in control of. And that is these three things. We are in control of how I act, we're in control of how I speak, and we're in control of how I think. Those three things I'm in control of. How I feel, if I feel any of these things, even may feel jealous, may feel angry, all these things, cynicism, pettiness, greed, this is all part of how I feel. All that ultimately doesn't really represent who I am unless it affects the three garments, which is my thought, my speech, and my action. That is ultimately what matters. We're all going through a moment now, collectively, as a Jewish people, that brings about all different types of emotions. For some, it may bring about anger. For some, it may bring about sadness. For some, it may bring about pessimism, cynicism. I mean, there's all different types of things. I'm just looking at some things on this list of how we may feel. But then we have to ask ourselves, I may feel a certain way, but one thing I could do is sit in front of a TV and watch all day and let it get to me. The other thing is to try and change these three things: my thought, my speech, and action. Take a look at text number 7, page 23. Thought, speech, and action are merely garments of the soul. Just as we are able to remove the body's garments, so we can remove the soul's garments of speech and action by refraining from speaking or acting. And just as we can exchange one article of clothing for another, so can we switch our thought, which constantly runs from one subject to another. This is in contrast to intellectual and emotional, that as part of the actual soul demand much effort to effectively change. This is why Adam, which is the word for man, is made up of the word Aleph, Daled, Mem. What's Aleph, Daled, Mem? Aleph comes from the word Aleph-cha, which means thought. Daled, Dibor, which means speech. And Mem, which means Maaseh, action. This is the Adam, this is the human being. Now you are able, doesn't mean that you can change character traits. You could change your character traits by constantly working on it. So if someone has an anger issue, constantly work on that, trying to not get angry. If someone has, things of how they constantly feel in certain instances, you could work on that. That's therapists are there to help to work on that. But so it doesn't mean that you can't change. You could constantly work on it. But on your day-to-day life, the three things that we could affect is our thought, speech, and action.
Is that how Adam got his name?
That's one expression of his name, yes. I mean, there's other meanings, but we're now focusing on this one. Text number 8. There was once a sage who sent a drawing of his face to a physiognomist, master who discerns temperament and character from one's outward appearance. When the master saw the drawing, he immediately blocked his face in fright. The messenger who brought the drawing asked him, "Why have you blocked your face from looking at the drawing?" The master replied, "I've never seen a face of such a horrible person before. I've seen in him coveting adultery, robbery. He shouldn't gaze at the face of such evil." The messenger was obviously terrified, bringing back this reading to the sage. However, the sage sent the word that he should return without fear. Upon his return, the sage inquired about what had occurred. The messenger conveyed everything that he had heard, concluding, "That's why I'm afraid to return to you." The sage replied, "Surely the physiognomist, the problem, outshines all others. Everything he said about me is true. My internal inclination drives me and seduces me to commit all the wrongdoings that my master saw. Yet, I use my wisdom to refrain from acting on it." So this is what we can learn as well. Many people have anxiety from things that are going on. But ultimately the question is not how I feel about it. Ultimately the question is, how do I think about it? How do I speak about it? And how do I act upon it? And so these are, whenever it comes to important things in life, this can help you out in general with anything that comes in life. We have to go through this process. The process is, you have to think, strategize, and plan. And this also has to do with consulting friends, experts, mentors, and we need to implement them. So these three things is with everything that happens in life. And if we take it will be very helpful in what happens in our day-to-day life. Number one, we have to think, strategize, plan, that's thought. Number two, speech, consult, talk to friends, talk to experts, talk to mentors. It's like the woman comes to the rabbi, she pours out her heart. She says, "Oh, thank you. Now I have no more tsaris, I have no more headaches." The rabbi says, "You may not have any more headaches, but I got it now." So, but it's important to speak to people. Talk to a friend, talk to a rabbi, talk to a mentor. And then you have to think about how to implement and bring it into reality. Thought, speech, and action. Everything in life has these aspects. Thought, speech, and action. Let's read text number 9. The behavior of properly functioning people is based on and guided by three things: thought, speech, and action. First comes thought. Those thoughts are then expressed via speech to others, such as when consulting friends who understand the specific field, for the sake of arriving to a clearer and more accurate picture of the matter. This allows a person to arrive at a practical conclusion, whereby their thought and discussions are translated into concrete action. Thought alone is insufficient. Similarly, contemplation with subsequent discussion is not enough. We must bring our plans into action. At the same time, in order for our action to be complete, we must reflect the reality that is simply the third link in a chain, following the forethought and helpful discussion. Otherwise, our actions will be rash. When we engage in all three, thought, speech, and action, in a particular order, we can reach our full potential, just as the hierarchy of the world is complete, only with all three worlds present in their specific order. Perhaps we could take out from here that there's three different types of mitzvahs that there are, and there's need for all three. There's mitzvahs that are action, primary action, doing good things, doing kindness, giving tzedakah, sharing with people, giving to people. This is one important mitzvah. Then you have mitzvahs that are associated with thought and speech. Prayer is speech, speaking saying, thought, studying Torah, speech, saying the words of Torah. So perhaps we can take on today, especially in times where we're living in such challenging times, to try and take on a mitzvah in these three aspects of life. Mitzvahs that are associated with action, to give more tzedakah, to do something for someone, to share, to give, to something that is thought, prayer. There are some mitzvahs that have both. You could put on tefillin, which is the action of putting on tefillin, as well as the prayer that goes along with it. You could say the Shema every morning and every evening. And then to study more Torah, to learn more. There's so much available online. You can listen to classes all day. So to try and find a way that we could affect our thought as well, that it should be positive. And when we think positive, that also makes that we speak positive, and our actions are positive as well. So we have to work on these three aspects of life, and try and do mitzvahs associated with them, and that helps us change our attitude. We're skipping the last part. We're just going to watch a video of the
Lesson 1. The evolution of ego. 1. The disposition of our internal character need not automatically dictate what occurs in the realm of our thought, speech, and action. We can control our levushim, irrespective of our personality. 2. Our actions should be preceded by proper planning, thought, and consultation, speech. On the other hand, we must make certain to graduate from planning and discussion to engage in concrete action. 3. We can begin each day with a motivational exercise that is a built-in feature of Jewish practice. To first think about the Creator, then verbalize our gratitude toward Him, and then act by ritually preparing our hands. This brief early morning tour through Biyah sets the appropriate tone for our entire day.
Okay. Next week, the dawn of limitation is going to be the next one. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. By the way, you can go to